Okay. So thank you again. I don't have any announcement to make, so I feel a bit pointless being here. So I'll just start on the panel. Our last panel is on sex work mental health, except we said we would not say mental health, we would call it psychosocial health. We know that is an extremely important topic for our community, and we're glad to have a whole panel who will discuss different aspects related to this topic. I'll just let you start directly, and you can come here and present and introduce yourself. Do you want water here, maybe? All right, cool. Thank you so much.
Hi, everybody. I hope you're all feeling lovely and full, and you're probably a bit sleepy. So, myself, I am Countess Diamond. That's my working name, and the name I go by in kind of places like this is Harper. Neither of those are my real names. And this is quite unusual for me to be this dressed on live stream. Normally, I'm presenting and doing things in latex and lingerie, and I work primarily online. And I'm here today with my very good friend and research colleague, Josie West, to talk about data violence against online workers and how that has an impact on what we're now calling psychosocial health, so mental health and well-being in the online workspace. We're going to cover revenge porn, institutionalized stigma, and then potentially a solution to the problems that online workers face. So what is data violence? It sounds quite scary, quite dramatic, and the way that it comes across in online spaces is the symbolic violences extracted by data technologies. So anytime your data has been used against you, or you have been marginalized or put into a siphon, that is how you are being victimized by your data. And what does it have to do with mental health and well-being of the sex work sector? It has everything to do with it. So from being here today and yesterday, I've realized that I actually feel like a slight amount of shame because I'm an online sex worker and I'm really proud to stand up and say I'm a sex worker. But I've never actually provided a full service full sex. And I feel like, oh my gosh, why am I entitled to say that I face this fear and stigma? And it's quite a struggle for me, but I know that by standing up and saying, yeah, I entertain people in a sexual manner, I believe I'm a sex worker, and I can use my privilege and my platform and my TikTok followers to stand up and fight for the rights of everybody in the sex industry. So what does this have to do, this online world, this porn we view, what does it have to do with mental health? It has an awful lot. So safety, autonomy, income, it all impacts the way we live our lives, the way we're seen on the internet and in the wider society, and therefore has impact on the working conditions and health of workers in this sector. So my personal experience of data violence, I have experienced my content being stolen, reproduced, banking services have been terminated, I have been questioned at borders, I have had my content screen recorded and shared without consent, online payment processors terminated multiple times, and I have been unable to get banking services. And these aren't unique experiences. I have been doxxed and stalked by uploaded ID. I've had my personal images linked to my work images without my consent. I have been shadow banned, if not permanently banned, and deplatformed due to banking terminations. At one point, I had 2 weeks to reroute my entire income from one platform to another. And I was 8 months pregnant. Data violence in numbers. So how does this affect the people that you communicate with in the wider world of sex work? So when asked which elements of data violence they had been subjected to, a survey showed that of 96% of full-service online workers in the Sex Workers Union in the UK, 80% of respondents had been the victim of image-based violence, 76% of respondents had experienced payment issues, 60% of respondents had been the victim of content theft or piracy, And 40% of the respondents stated that they have been victims of doxing. Now, that's almost half of the sex workers in the Sex Workers Union have been victims of doxing. And doxing can be a life-threatening, life-limiting situation. This is violence against sex workers in the broadest of terms. A 2023 survey of UK sex workers showed that 96% of full-service respondents, so that is as many respondents who work indoors or on the street, 96% of those at some point in their career are online. So whether that's advertising their full-service work or earning a little bit of cash through selling feet pics, whatever stage of the process, the parts of this industry, 96% of the people in the union were affected by online regulation. So I'm here to present to you the problem, and I have spoken with my colleague Josie, who has become a wonderful, fantastic friend. We've only actually just met this week. We have been talking for quite some time, and we've only just met. It's really cool. So what is the solution? I've come with a problem, and I've tried to communicate across what is the solution. I believe that ethical trade, ensuring fair prices, fair labor conditions, and transparent practices in online spaces is essential to maintaining a safe workspace. Now, this sounds like regulation, and indeed it kind of is, but we are already regulated online, so why not make these regulations work in our favor? What does this have to do with safety and health in sex work? By implementing fair trade practices, and I want you to consider fair trade chocolate, fair trade coffee, where the workers get a minimum wage, where they get what they deserve and they get safe working conditions, the sex industry can work towards mitigating harm, improving working conditions, and overall destigmatization of the industry. And if 96% of UK sex workers have been affected by this, that's an awful lot of people. And I also want you to consider the amount of people who consume the content that these people create in terms of a digital product. You yourself have watched porn, I'm sure of it. Wouldn't it be incredible to say that the porn that you consumed, however violent, however graphic, however unusual and strange, was absolutely recorded in the fairest, above-board manner, and you can guarantee that? Anyway, that's the problem and a possible solution, and I will pass over to Josie.
Thank you, Diamond. So yeah, it might seem like a bit of a pie-in-the-sky idea, but it's existed for a while now among sex workers and grassroots activists. And if you look at the kind of what fair trade did for farming, we can see that it established clear ethical standards and did this through a co-op. So workers' cooperatives are democratically owned, they're owned by the workers, and there's obviously better divestment of profits. You also have to have transparent supply chains, so we're thinking about building a platform that can't be vulnerable to sex trafficking perpetrators. So then also we can stop this conversation that's not differentiating between consensual sex workers and non-consensual sex workers from happening online, which is currently really problematic. And also you would have to have a fair trade certifying organisation for sex workers. So we'd want this to be sex worker-led, and these would be people who are monitoring the standards of online sex work platforms and ensuring that they're adhering to certain standards. And then we can also apply this to labour context globally. This doesn't just have to be in the UK where me and Diamond are working. So just like going into this a little bit deeper, so what are these kind of conditions that we're talking about? So we want a minimum price set for wages. We want a minimum price set for products, like for camming, that would be like photos and video content. And obviously, we're all here talking about work and the improvement of labour standards in the sex work sector, and this could seriously promote health and well-being standards. We could even build this into the platform, so we could have specific areas around mental health and resources around mental health. I found generally in my research that these kind of capitalist-owned platforms are not generally concerned with the well-being of their workers. What they're concerned with is profits and ensuring they abide by regulations or getting workers to work as much as possible through their kind of coercive algorithm systems. We can also have anti-exploitation measures built in, so anti-screen recording software. We need super tight, watertight online identity protection going on as well, obviously, because it's a huge concern for sex workers. And how do we know how these capitalist platforms are storing your data? That's obviously a key concern. And also building end-to-end encryption into the product of labor. So when someone sells some content, if someone steals that and posts it elsewhere, we'll know where it came from. And yeah, we want to focus on improving consumers' ideas of sex workers. So really thinking about getting them to think about making an ethical choice when they consume porn and sex work in general, and not putting their money into these more exploitative platforms that aren't really thinking about labor rights in general. I think that's really important. So, like when you go to a supermarket and you see a fair trade banana and you see a normal banana, you do have to make a kind of ethical choice in your head. So I want to talk a little bit about fair trade porn in academia. So this idea did arise from the grassroots. There's someone called Tristan Taormino, who's a feminist porn producer. I don't know if you guys have probably heard of her. And they basically started talking about fair trade porn with reference to their work in feminist pornography, and how they started producing porn where there was conversations around consent with regards to different practices, and also creating porn for the female, not just the male gaze, but centering female pleasure and that kind of thing. So she was one of the first people I can find that talks about fair trade porn. And then Heather Berg talks about feminists, how these spaces within porn is drawing important attention to notions of worker control, which I think is really critical, not just within sex work, but within labour rights in general. There needs to be worker control. And back in 2008, we had someone called Aston talking about the ethical consumer, and she was actually referring to female consumers of sex work who go abroad and buy sex. And she was kind of challenging the idea that all consumers of sex are kind of seedy, gross people, when actually you can be an ethical consumer of sex. And then finally we have Wilkinson talking about these discourses of fair trade, ethical and socially responsible porn, and talking about how they're imagining kind of these alternative economic structures, which I think is really important in this context. My field of interest is digital political economy, and I'm thinking about how capitalism could be changed. And I think sex workers are really at the forefront of that sort of resistance to the standard employment model, and wanting more autonomous work and that kind of thing. So I think there's some exciting possibilities there. So I want to quickly talk about power and disempowerment. So I know that the language of empowerment can be complicated in this work, because people can feel like, why do we have to be empowered by our work? Why is there always this discourse? But we can see that Foster-Sester, the bill from America, has been extremely disempowering for sex workers, removing the ability to advertise online, not differentiating between consensual and non-consensual sex workers, has been hugely impactful across the whole world, not just within the American context where sex work is really, really criminalized. And then just recently in the UK, we have had the Online Safety Act, which is all about reducing online harms for children and for trafficking victims and that kind of thing. But it really hasn't at all taken into consideration consensual sex workers. There's no discourse whatsoever within the Act about protecting all forms of sex work as vulnerable to harm, which is really, really problematic. And so this is going to lead to greater punitive approaches to online advertising, even more than there is already. Just today you said that you got locked out of Google, didn't you? just today, Diamond was locked out of her Google Drive account. You also said that some WhatsApp groups are being shut down already in the UK. So already we can see these, what the government is essentially trying to do is make platforms accountable for sex work, advertising of sex work and trafficking, but it's having a really harmful effect. But there is hope to be found. So I use a workerist theorist called Mario Tronti. He's a Marxist. He was writing in the 60s and 70s and was organizing, a big part of like the organizing in factories at the time. And he says that technology can be repurposed to sabotage capital. And I think this is a really important idea in the context of the gig economy, which camming is part of. Because although these gig economy platforms can be quite extractive and exploitative, they're also giving the means of production potentially to workers themselves. So it is actually possible with this new technology. You know, like workers own the computers, they own the cameras and the ring lights and all of that. They could also potentially own the platforms instead of them being capitalist owned. And this idea has emerged from someone called Trevor Scholes. He's doing a lot of work on this in New York. And he's been part of a big movement of platform cooperatives in the gig economy. So places like Uber and those kind of apps like Deliveroo, like food service delivery platforms are being platformized. So the workers are essentially owning them. So it's marrying the kind of gig economy technology with the notion of worker ownership and power. And myself and Diamond, I'm currently applying for some funding to try and get this kick-started, and it will be primarily worker-led and worker-owned, completely worker-owned. So it is complicated. There are some arguments against it. Are we going to be able to compete against venture capitalist-backed platforms, which have a lot more power? But we think by kind of building in these fair trade principles, we're potentially forcing consumers to make an ethical choice, which might, it's still very preliminary. We haven't started it yet, but hopefully it could bring about some change. And there's someone called Mark Graham at Oxford University in the UK that's actually doing some really cool research in this area. I don't know if you guys have heard of the Fair Work Foundation, but they've created a set of 5 principles for fair work, and this is like a completely transnational movement of like workers, academics, lawyers, and they're going around and basically being this kind of certifying organization like there was in fair trade, and they are giving these gig economy platforms a fair work valuation, basically, and they've only just started thinking about online sex work. So we have quite a big base to build on if we do get the funding for our platform cooperative. So there's some exciting movements going in this direction. So yeah, I just wanted to touch quickly on the differences between workers and academics, and I'm really grateful for the people today who spoke about co-research and ethical practices. It's really helpful for me to think about. And I think we have to really think about what spheres we're operating in and how we can separately contribute to this movement. Workers are obviously in the grassroots. You guys are doing the most work here. You guys are the experts of sex workers' rights. You can also obviously unionize and lobby government, as many of you are doing. And particularly within camming, being a multi-billion-dollar sector, you can also cause disruption within production. So that is a powerful thing. And there was a big OnlyFans resistance when they threatened to kick sex workers out, and they immediately, within like 4 days, did a massive U-turn after loads of Twitter protesting and stuff. So yeah, this is a industry that has a lot of power if they do organize. And then academics can draw on expertise in terms of online sex work within technology, so how to build the software of these platforms fairly, how can we rebuild algorithms in the interests of workers rather than in the interests of the capitalists, and also labor rights. And we can also, like, this conference is so cool. I really, really appreciate what you're doing here. Encourage as much collaboration as possible. We also, I think, need to get sex workers writing as much, so it's not just us writing for them or in their interests, it's also them co-collaborating, authoring papers. We could even potentially think about writing something together out of this conference. And we can also make policy recommendations, as can you guys. So I think we need to think, this is like a very basic outline, but I think we need to think about where we're different and how we can align and how we can do the same thing to help the movement in general. So thank you.
Can you see that quicker than I can? Yes. Great, thank you. Hello everyone, my name is Paul and I'm a sociologist from Maynooth University in Ireland, and I'm speaking on behalf of our research team on this particular project, which is made up of academics and sex workers. Becky Lacey, that you heard yesterday, is also part of this. She's deciding to sit this one out, but is available for any questions as well. So there's few advantages being the last session in any conference. I think one of them is possibly that you've seen what's gone before, which is also a little bit terrifying in terms of the expertise in the room. But I think certainly I would leave a little bit more optimistic about potential solutions. So as you see what this title is, Sex Work Experience Accessing Mental Health Services, yes, it's another kind of really shitty experiences of accessing mental health in Ireland. And we definitely have heard a lot of that throughout the days. But I think we've also heard like solutions, and I think that's also a positive in terms of Mark and Layla's, in terms of what we can do, because peer training is such an important part which came out of this. So it certainly kind of can push us forward as well. So it's an optimistic story as well. I'm just going to pivot a little bit from that as well, so you're not hearing exactly what you've heard in different countries. Obviously, each country is very unique as well in relation to this. So the background of the project is this Health Service Executive National Office for Suicide Prevention. If you think that sounds a little pathologizing, it's not really. It's a much broad kind of government strategy on mental health. And it's really crucial to kind of get into it because it's sort of the strategy document, which is really the gatekeeper for funding. So for the first time, sex workers, you'll see, squeezed in at the end of this list of vulnerable groups. Ireland, as you might know, is a Nordic model country. Things are pretty grim. We don't have much space for it's just not looking very good at the moment. So I think this is important to get into this sort of strategy. So the idea is that future research and future research funding would have to be aligned. So this could open up then the possibility for looking and research and funding peer research and maybe some programs like that. So it is positive. So I'm saying it's positive. We have obviously sex workers on the research and also part of the national, we have an advisory committee as well. But you have to, of course, pitch that in terms of my sex worker colleagues who are really, led down by government, led down by agencies like this, and really had to be convinced. And I was trying to say, this could be worthwhile. Now, I don't really know that yet, or what that's going to look like. But I think when you have sex workers kind of constantly led down by the state, it's very difficult to buy into this idea that this is going to make their lives better. It's yet another kind of project. And sex workers, I think, rightly were concerned about issues around whether it was going to be tokenistic or whether it was actually going to be meaningful. And I'm also going to talk about the research, the methods of this as well, because it's quite interesting. So, why is it important? Well, as you know, a lot of the work has been on health in terms of access to physical health. There's been less attention on mental health. So in that sense, I think it's good. It's building on work that's been done, European studies, which really has looked at this. And what we're trying to do is put together a picture, kind of a tapestry of what's happening in different countries in relation to mental health. So this small project kind of fits into that, and it gives us that idea of what is, of where it is, but particularly, of course, under countries that have client criminalisation. So what does it look like in relation to this? Just to go back to the strategy in mental health, I don't know what it is in your own, in everyone's jurisdictions, but in Ireland, it's very much this kind of individualized strategy. It's very much this kind of neoliberal model. All the advertising is, just talk to somebody and, your mental health problems will like fade away. And what we were really trying to push back against that in the strategy and say, like, you can talk until you're blue in the face. That's not going to stop the police harassing you. That's not going to stop you getting evicted. That's not going to stop you potentially being deported. So we have to shift it into a kind of a structural conversation about how people are living and how sex workers are living. And that's really, really important. So that's why it's important here that we do that. There is then existing research on the disclosures. I've been involved in some of this work myself. So, and again, I think this was really fascinating throughout the days. People like Lizzie's paper, looking at questions of disclosure. How can we get people to disclose? What are the barriers? What sort of services do people want? And this is what was coming out of this. Do people want bespoke sex worker dedicated services, or do they see that as being siloed? Do people want services integrated into mainstream state or municipal services as well? So all of that work that's been carried on, which we've heard about throughout the days, I think is really important in relation to this. So just quite quickly, and this has come up in kind of various ways, where we know that the difficulty around the literature on sex worker mental health is trying to untangle what is what therapists and mental health professionals see as mental health issues deriving solely and exclusively from sex work. So the challenge for sex workers is to separate out what that is and be heard without it always going back to sex work. And particularly, of course, in a country like Ireland, which has client criminalisation, the obsession with exit. So it's all about, exit, and this is the title, where people are told, you really are, in a sense, kind of self-harming if you're continuing with your sex work. And this is the message that mental health services are giving sex workers. So, but the literature that we have, and this has been used, of course, by those that support client criminalisation particularly, is they're taking studies disproportionately from StreetWork. It's not really giving us the full picture of what is going on. Again, the second one, that sex work is the sole cause of poor mental health. And of course, sex workers' voices then have been traditionally colonized by researchers. So researchers, politicians, they're the ones that have been, the ones who have been kind of telling this story. So again, you've heard from Myers, I think this was in Lizzie's on Monday, and we're using this kind of adaptation of minority health. This is quite useful to understand what is, I'm not going to rehearse this again, but some of it, the internalization, the concealment, the anticipated stigma. So you've had a bad experience of mental health professionals and you're less likely to return into services. So it's useful in relation to that. And structural violence, again, it's where we're really kind of locating our contribution to this strategy. Enough with individualization and more about talking about the context in which people live their lives. And as we know, sex workers, not a homogenous community, and so we need to understand what that is. I just wanted to say something a little bit methodology. I was fascinated by the previous discussion from Birmingham, from our British colleagues, and where it was very much kind of presented that I suppose the gold standard maybe of how to do this sort of research and how to carry out sex work research. Just to say here in this project, this was incredibly difficult. We had a lack of trust on different issues. We had kind of a breakdown of relationships on different issues. We had people resigning. We had people rejoining. We had people, a whole range of issues going on. And I think if you're a sex worker, if you're an NGO, if you're an academic, we really do need to have a conversation about research. I think we have big international projects where sex work organizations are pulling out. We have academic researchers that have a lot of money who are saying that they won't work on sex work topics again. So there is a real problem, and I think we do need to address it. Now, some of it's personality, but some of it is also institutional. So for universities, including my own, they're impossible. They won't pay respondents, they won't pay peer researchers, they won't pay, you'll see we paid for counselling support, they won't approve a budget that has all of that. So we're really trying to move it over to an NGO to try and speed up that. But again, with sex workers not being paid on time, these sort of delays, people feeling disrespected by the researchers, breaks trust, and in a small country like Ireland, it is really this is really, really important. So I think again we need to kind of come back to this and talk about what engaged research should look like. And one of the problems is, of course, that proposals and funding like this one goes in, the proposal and the methodology is locked down, it's been approved by the funders, there's no sex work input into that process. Sex workers are coming in at a much later stage where a lot of those decisions are being made. So if we talk about democracy in the process, there's going to have to be something in terms of the proposal and what that methodology is going to look like, I think, for it to work. And the second, of course, is the money. Yes, I mean, you can be a PI. The PI is the control. They control the money, and that is the central power. And until there is a way of distributing that power equally among all of the people in that project, it's never going to be truly participatory. And I think that's the problem, that universities are inflexible to do that. And there's a question of whether they're the best institutions to do it as well. So just something then on what we did. Sorry, I ranted there a little bit. We conducted 18 semi-structured interviews with sex workers, 5 with service providers, and I just spoke to you there a little bit about what we were trying to do. Now, there is learning, of course, in this, and we're trying to think about what that would be like. Tila Sanders in the University of Leicester, she recommends this kind of research protocol that people could kind of abide by if you were undertaking research on sex work. This exists in Australia with Aboriginal communities. If you want to do that work, you have to abide by some sort of set of principles. So there may be some way that we could do this to make it truly democratic. I just want to finish. I've kind of lost track of my own time, sorry. I just wanted to finish with some of what we were looking at. And I suppose this is the not surprising piece, I suppose, and you've heard versions. But we're very much on that kind of structural context. And for us, it was cost of living, it was housing, and what we heard from Finland and from Sweden that have this model as well, that there is this, yes, workers can work legally if they're on their own, but they're at risk of eviction if they're working together. And the anxiety, all of that brings to the forth. So again, this responded kind of talking about desperately fighting for survival and constantly worried about survival and worried about the future as well. The experience then, again, not poor. And what's happened, of course, in Ireland, and the warning in terms of client criminalisation is it becomes embedded institutionally. So in the justice system, for example, in the health system, it becomes embedded. It has a chilling effect on funding, but it has a chilling effect on what services are provided and how the latitude that individual people have in terms of delivering services. So again, it very much came across that she was disappointed in me. You know, she would say things like about leaving. It's like, oh, you're so smart. I mean, that line kind of comes up. Again, you could do anything. But she broke up with me after 6 months into the pandemic. Her whole thing was, I don't think I can help you anymore if you can continue with this line of work. So in terms of the criminal environment, as I said, it's harassment for police. So this is dressed up as what are called welfare checks. So the Irish police are basically checking on your welfare. So they turn up in uniform at your where you're renting or your house to check if you're doing okay. And it's completely bogus, obviously. It creates huge amounts of stress. People feel that they're going to be evicted in the middle of a housing crisis in Ireland, which is horrific. Creating really great stress, particularly, again, for migrants, people of precarious migration status, having the police coming to your door like this. And here she's saying, by saying that, what's stressful for me, the problems you're causing me is you being here, you turning up at my door, that is the problem. Please go away. And that would be something that would make it better. And the last one is just on the services themselves. So again, through the days, we've heard versions of this and possible frameworks that we could use. But certainly certainly sex workers wanted a greater say, wanted to input, wanted to contribute into the training of mental health services. Some of them had already been involved and wanted to become mental health professionals themselves because they'd seen so much bad practice. So all of these sort of things were seen as really, really important. Marty, who's the director of Sex Worker Alliance Ireland, saying that it is really only the peer-to-peer space, that peer-only stance, that is only providing you with the freedom that you can come in and that you won't be judged. And just to conclude, again, the main thing I would say here, again, on that question of mental health and individualization, the move, I think, to this more structural understandings, and certainly the role in relation to a peer. The biggest campaign we're having, we've kind of almost given up on that this criminalisation bill will be overturned, although there is a review currently. We don't have much faith in where that's going. But we're certainly trying to repeal these brothel-keeping laws, which in the Irish context say that basically two sex workers working together in an apartment in Ireland constitutes a brothel. So the only people, since this has been brought in 2017, I think 4 men have been prosecuted for buying sex. 4 people in 7 years. I mean, it's an astronomical waste of money and resources. The only people that have been prosecuted, you've guessed, of course, are sex workers who are prosecuted for brothel keeping under this law and are actually in prison sometimes. So again, what we heard this morning in terms of both Finland and Sweden, this sort of sell that it's for the women, it really doesn't bear out.
What about non-binary people, gay people that do sex work, or men that do sex work?
Yeah, and I've looked at men, particularly actually migrant men, looking at Brazilian men in Dublin, and they are really linked into different services. You know, they're linked into LGBT health services where they're getting PrEP. They're pretty well catered for. There is peer-to-peer network among those health services. So they're getting a much better deal. It is in terms of the women's health service, which is really letting women down, letting sex workers down. Okay, on that note, I'm finished. Thank you.
So we will have a presenter who is going to join online first. They are waiting on Zoom, so they would be the next one, and then we can continue. Yes, we can hear you. Thank you. Can you please try it now? Yes, we can hear you well.
Hear myself and let me know if to chat or something, if someone says something. So, my name is Stavroula. Operated by the Greek Association of People Living with HIV called Positive Voice. StreetWork project is an outreach program where we go outside and meet sex workers in the field of work. We visit brothels, studios, we go out on the streets, or near hotels that they work in, and we offer condoms, safer injection kits. We do tests for HIV, hepatitis B, C, and syphilis, and we also provide referrals to any services that they might need, among other things. Here today, we're going to discuss about the non-consensual condom removal, also known as stealthing, in female sex workers, which is an issue that our sex worker members brought to our attention through our street work rounds. So, okay, before we start, let's define stealthing. Stealthing is the intentional, non-consensual condom removal or distraction during a sexual encounter, and it is therefore a form of sexual violence. Stealthing survivors often feel violated, like experience same guilt, much like rape victims do, and they have high risk of sexually transmitted infections and unwanted pregnancies. We've seen in research that women are more vulnerable to stealthing incidents. Gender inequalities and male dominance actually normalize abusive behaviors toward women and minorities. And as you can imagine, female sex workers, being both women and marginalized and discriminated against because of their work, are the most vulnerable. And actually, you don't have to imagine, because Latimer did a research recently in Australia and showed that female sex workers are 3 times more likely to suffer stealthing than the general population. So based on that, we started looking it up, and our lawyer, Geliki Soule, went to the legal authority in Greece and filed an official request for an opinion of legality in stealthing. The legal authority replied that stealthing is actually not legally acknowledged as an assault in the country, but they asked us if we could present data on the matter for prevalence and how it affects those involved. And that's what we did, and that's how this whole project started. We did a research in the general population and in female sex workers. And here we're going to present the findings for female sex workers in particular. But before I do that, let me give you some legal context on sex work as well, in Greece, I mean. Sex work in Greece is partially criminalized. That means that in theory, brothel-based sex work is legal and all other forms of sex work are illegal. However, the law is so stringent that it's practically impossible to obtain and maintain a license to practice sex work in densely populated cities like Athens. So, as I said earlier, the objectives, the goals of this study was to examine the prevalence of stealthing in female sex workers in Athens and its association to their psychosocial health and perceived discrimination. So 71 female sex workers provided their answers to 3 questionnaires, like general health questionnaire, a stealthing scale, the one that Latimer developed, and an everyday discrimination scale. Here you can see some demographics of a sample. The mean age was 41 years old. The mean number of sexual partners here refers to in the past 6 months. And it's roughly 10 clients a day if someone abstained from work 7 days a month. As you can see, the sample is divided between cis and trans women, women from Greece, Russian or Eastern European, Balkan. We also had some other nationalities, women who had only sex with men, women who had sex with men, women, and other genders, and women that worked full or part-time in the sex industry. In our results, we also saw, Latimer, that the prevalence of stealthing was quite high in female sex workers. 63.4% of them reported that they have experienced stealthing. 38.6% of them experienced stealthing more than once. And in 88.6% of the cases, the incident was work-related. It happened during work. 79.5% of them, never saw them again, the perpetrator, they threw them out. 53.5% of them stopped after realization. However, 15.5% of them continued unwillingly, as I said, because they were afraid of further violence. And the 26.8% of the female sex workers that participated in the study realized it afterwards. As you can see, I don't know if you can see it, but all of our participants, when asked, consider stealthing immoral. Almost all consider it illegal, and 66.7% of them consider it a sexual abuse. More than half of them reported negative emotional and psychological effects after the fact. Almost half of them had verbal and physical fights with the perpetrator. However, almost all avoided reporting to the police. And the reason, as you can see, is the fear of getting in trouble. And it's a very valid fear because it's actually illegal. In practice, it's illegal to practice sex work in Athens. And everyone, no one has any licenses. And also because they thought the police wouldn't do anything. And that's actually also a valid assumption, as we learned from the legal authority that stealthing is actually not legally acknowledged as an assault. 88.9% of them avoided talking to family members as well and friends. mostly because that meant that they had to disclose their profession. And in many cases, you can see, because they have normalized stealthing, they consider it like a work-related hazard. Now, in general, stealthing incidents were related to the number of sexual partners, perceived discrimination, and psychological distress. Before we go to the last two, I just wanted to talk about the first one. I mean, we didn't actually measure for the socioeconomic status of our participants. However, we consider that the number of sexual partners shows that. We cannot make that claim though, because we didn't, but we just wanted to take a minute and explain that the lower the price of the service, the more clients our members had to service in order to make ends meet. So that's why we consider this particular finding. We think that shows that female sex workers with lower socioeconomic status are more in danger of stealthing incidents. Let's go and see, however, the other two findings. We saw that the prevalence of stealthing in the female sex workers is very high, and that means that we need to work on that. We need to put it in our agenda and deal with it in every way we can. We also saw that the members of the female sex worker community were the members that were most vulnerable to discrimination, either for their sex work or gender identity or gender, were the ones that suffered stealthing the most. And we also saw that the stealthing incidents actually affected the psychosocial life of female sex workers. So first off, I mean, the first conclusion we came up to was we need to work towards a legal acknowledgement of stealthing as an assault in the country. We have already presented our data to the legal authorities, and they are starting an examination to see if they need to change the law to make it punishable in any way. However, we all know that even if it gets legally acknowledged as an assault, stealthing, I mean, if sex work is still criminalized, no female sex worker will ever report to the police. So we keep on working on the decriminalization of sex work, and it's related one with the other. We cannot see the one without the other, obviously. And we also work towards prevention and supporting sex workers when people and sex workers like to work on things related to sexual violence and stealthing incidents. And in terms of prevention, what we did, it was the first step we took was requesting female condoms. We just got a donation. We're expecting 1,000 female condoms, and we're about to take them, go outside and see how the community will react, how the community will see them. We will use materials, tutorials. We will get back to you on that one. And we really love the feedback if you have on this particular subject. And closing, we absolutely cannot stress that enough, the engagement of the sex worker community. This particular project, it wouldn't be possible at all if we didn't engage the sex worker community. And if something changes in the law on stealthing in Greece, a law that will affect all people in risk of stealthing incidents, we all have the Greek sex worker community to thank for that. So yeah, please engage the sex worker community, and that's a request for all research done on sex work. That's it from me. Thank you. I don't know if we take any questions now or at the end. I will stop sharing now.
Do you have any questions to Stavroula?
Thank you so much. The note on the female condoms, because you've mentioned that you ordered some. We tried, within the context of outreach we were doing in Poland, to distribute female condoms, but the issue was that some sex workers were saying that using them is not evident to clients, so then the message spreads that sex workers provide unprotected sex. So there is more pressure on unprotected sex in some contexts when female condoms are used, and they were described as not really handy. So, I mean, all of you who have seen them probably know. And so that was it. And when it comes to the condom removal in workplaces, so we were working also towards making sure that in all sex work settings, sex workers have access to day after pills.
I'm sorry, I can't hear you. Wait.
And now?
Yeah.
Is it better? But you've heard me before? Yeah. So we try to make sure that the day after pills and like some other medicines for different infections are at hand always in the venues, so that people don't have to search for them when there is such a situation. And thank you so much for this really interesting research.
Thank you.
Take it over.
Are there more questions to Stavroula? No? Okay. Then thank you very much, Stavroula.
Thank you.
Thank you for your time, and thank you for joining us. And then the next presenter is Mia.
Thank you. Hello. Put it here. Okay. Okay. Hello, everybody. For yourself, heartily welcome. I'm Mia Rose. I'm a sex worker from Leipzig, Germany. I'm a trans mom and a co-founder of Family Affair, a peer project of sex workers plus childcare, also in Leipzig. And as I mentioned on recent talks during the conference here and before, it was a little bit irritating what plus childcare mean. So I decided to begin to tell the story of Family Affair from the beginning, when we offer no childcare. This self-help group was formed at the beginning of 2018, and by two lovely sex workers. And I think it's important to mention the background, the political background at this time, especially in Eastern Germany. Because in 2017, there was the Prostitutionsschutzgesetz, which means regulation of sex work, of legal sex work in Germany. But there was no infrastructure during this time in Eastern Germany. We had no service advice centers. The nearest one was in West Berlin, Hydra, which was the first service advice center in Germany, founded at the beginning of the 80s from some feminist whores. But there was, at this time, there was interest and information and about getting in contact with other sex workers. So that's the reason why this self-help project was founded. What it was founded under the simple name Sex Worker Frühstück. Frühstück means breakfast in English. And actually it's a branch because we meet at 11 a.m. and it lasts until 2 p.m. And it's a safe space, which means it's only for sex workers only. The only criterion to come to this place, to our meeting, is being an active sex worker or a former sex worker. No one other is allowed to come. And it's kind of a round table where we offer some food, and it's a diversity of so many professions. There are people who work as an escort or working in a brothel. I get experience working in a fun house, and also different workplaces, like in a brothel or like escorts, they're working in hotels. And some of them got flats, working flats of their own. And that means there's so much knowledge on the table, which is very helpful for people who are starting in the business. They can come to us, they can ask us, and they get knowledge of possibility how to work, to make a decision really of their own, like my body, my choice, and my work. And it's so much more, sex work is so much more than spread in the legs, as some people think. And that's been the situation just about 4 years. And during this year, there came more and more parents and saying, such a good thing, but I can't come to you because I don't find someone who takes to look after my children on Sunday, because we meet on a Sunday and there's no kindergarten, there's no school. And that's why I came up with the idea of why don't we offer also a childcare? And we managed to get this at the middle of the year. We raise money, we find a new place. Now we are suited at a community health center, which is ground floor, so there's no barriers last until the barrier of our language, because we only can offer this meeting in German, of course, in English, and we got some people who speak in Russian. But other language is not possible for us. That's the only barrier. It's ground flooded. Maybe if some people are disabled or with a wheelchair, they can take part. And I'm so grateful that we found this new place. It's, as I said, a community health center. During the week, they offer a refugee law clinic. They offer medical advice and medical help for people with no insurance. That's not on a weekend, but if people come to us, we can tell them about this things which is able. They knew the place, and they can go there. And some words about parents in the sex industry. It was already mentioned here, but I want to say something about it. Giovanna Gilgis, who's one of the heads of the Gesellschaft für Sexarbeit und Prostitutionsforschung, maybe someone knew it. She thinks that we can estimate about 50 up to 70% of sex workers being parents, mostly mothers. And as we all know, sex work is work and parenting is care work. So there's a double burden for every person in this situation. But parents in the sex industry are confronted with job-specific discrimination, according also due to their parenthood and to the children. Because we're still living in a society where the sentence, your mother is a whore, is a vicious assault for every child. And what other profession could so easily be used to question someone's ability to suitability for parenthood, like the sense in which responsible mother would work as a prostitute? It's so easily questioned. So single mothers in sex work in particular live with a constant risk of losing their children if the wrong person finds out what they are doing for the children's needs. So that is family affair. A sex worker Frühstück with the supply of childcare. And the beauty for me on family affair lies in being an open and safe space at the same time. What does open space mean? It means the person who are coming are the right persons who are coming. And the things that are happening are the only things that could happen. No obligation. The people who come to us can talk whatever they like, whatever they have on their mind. And we listen and we see them. I want to tell you some of the topics so that you get an expression of what's happening at our table. The topics we talk about are tax problems, new workplaces, violence, menstruation, clown fetish, women in finance, how to talk with your children about your profession, sexual existence, advertising, being new in the business, pregnancy, coven. I don't know if you know, needs to be taking care of each other if you're going on a date. They don't have to go alone. Outing, breastfeeding, working in other cities, experiences and problems, restricted area regulations, coming up workshops and events. That's something that we, from an organized team, it's probably the only input we give. We inform the people about upcoming workshops and upcoming events. Like we had a workshop for self-defense, especially for sex workers. That's what we announced. Or like this conference, activism and experiences with therapists, like I had a recent time before. That's all things I could talk about and was so grateful. Yeah. I think that's what family is. For me, it's a strategy dealing with the circumstances. We take care of our own mental health, and that's why we choose family affair for our project, because for mostly of my colleagues and for me, sex work is a family because we take care of each other, and taking care of each other is political work too. Thank you very much. This one for you, I should put it here. Yeah? I'll hold it so long.
Thank you. I think I'll use the mouse because I'm most used to it. I'll use the mouse. Okay. Oh, hello everyone. This has been a really powerful conference, and just so honored to be here. And being the last speaker means that a lot of the themes that I was going to mention have been covered, but it just proves that we're cooking from the same kitchen, right? We all have different experiences of some of the same themes. So today I'm going to share with you a little bit about what National Ugly Mugs does for those of you who don't know, and those who do, don't fall asleep. Please stay awake for us. And then also share some highlights across some of the sex worker-led studies that we've done, just focusing on pulling out the comments that people said around mental health, and then some of the action items that NUM's doing. Okay, so If you don't know who I am, yeah, so sorry. I've been organizing in sex worker community development in Canada and the UK. Next year it's going to be 30 years, actually. So you saw a lot of the same themes. It feels like Groundhog's Day sometimes, like the same things going over and over. But we are making progress, and the movement is growing. So I'm just so honored to be part of it. Okay, where am I here? So a lot of the sex worker advocacy organizations in the UK, there are several of them, some you've heard of today, but most of them are not service providers, so there are very, very few service providers that are specialist organizations that also hire people in and from sex industries to deliver services, and so that's a bit of a shame. But at NUM, I joined NUM in about 2018, and so the focus there was to make sure that we hire people in and from industries, we provide the skills that their counterparts would have in other services such as caseworkers, we make sure the caseworkers have their ESWA qualification, we make sure that we hire diverse populations because racialized independent sexual violence advisors don't exist in the wild. You have to produce them. And so part of the work of NUM is making sure that sex workers come through and have the skills they need to go off and do other work in this field or other fields, but at least if they want to contribute to the third sector, they have some sort of accreditation to be able to do that. So, NUM was founded in 2012, but it was out of the UK network of sex work projects. So unlike other sex worker organizations that were grassroots, this one came out of a practitioner system, so it was a membership-driven service. And so there was advocacy for a national and digitized reporting and alerting mechanism for sex workers in the UK because there were so many dodgy punter and ugly mug schemes that weren't speaking into each other, and perpetrators would just move from location to location. Also, sex workers were quite mobile, particularly street-based populations at that time, and there's a mass migration, as you know, of sex work online. So we wanted to make sure that sex workers could report violence, receive information to share with other sex workers in a very timely fashion, because there's no point somebody getting the information on a Thursday and doesn't get it out to the sex work community till Tuesday. So those kinds of things have to serve their preventative function. So we also expanded our mandate to include all forms of violence, just in recognition of the intersectional violence that sex workers experience, and making sure that we're not sort of invisibilizing forms of violence to prioritize interpersonal violence, because that's just one form. So some of the services that NUM provides is that reporting and alerting mechanism, so sex workers and third parties can report in violence digitally, or they can call our casework team, or they can email. And then some of those reports are processed into alerts to send information that's enough information to warn, but not enough information to identify individuals. So if we were to set up NUM again today, we probably couldn't because of various pieces of legislation and privacy laws, but it is enough information that if a sex worker had contact with that individual, they'd be able to identify that individual from the alert. And we get a lot of feedback from sex workers that they're on the way to see someone, and then they happen to, read the alerts and then decided against it because the person's been reported by someone else. The checker tool is based on our database, so we have 11 years right now, curated 11 years of violence against sex workers in the UK. So that database, we use that for the NUM checker. So sex workers can screen clients based on this, so they can check profile names, email addresses, car registrations, and phone numbers. And if we get a hit on the database, then an alert, all the alerts associated with that information comes up, and then people can see, if this person has been linked to any other harm against sex workers. There's something else I want to say about the database, but I can't remember right now. And then we also have a casework team, because the reporting and alerting is a really important feature. Sex workers have been doing it for decades, since probably the beginning. But you know, to be able to then provide support to individuals who have survived violence is the other half, because otherwise you have people who haven't processed and healed and recovered from the harm they experience, and as you know, pull down your skirt and go back to work, right? So we want to make sure that people who report violence to us have somebody that they can go to talk about what they want to do next, so that way it puts the sex worker in control, because they might have not have been in control before, but they're in control now, right? And so that is definitely supporting individuals in accessing resources and referrals, and some people want to take breaks from sex work right after victimization, so we facilitate that as well. During the pandemic, we developed the mental health services, because mental health issues among sex workers at that time and throughout time, but at that time in particular, was dire. And so other folks have talked about the impact of COVID, but we've had suicides, we've had suicide ideation, we've had depression, and you know what happens when people lose their income overnight, right? And even though there was legislation against eviction, sex workers are still getting evicted during the pandemic. So, actually, Marin got evicted during the pandemic. So it was a very real lived experience. And so what we did is we contracted a therapist. He's a hypnotherapist, but he's worked with sex worker organizations previously. And he developed a directory of sex worker-friendly therapists. And so they had to sign on to a decrim mandate and also commit to not being reductionists, so that everything that's wrong with you is because you're a sex worker, right? Like you have a headache, it's because you're a sex worker, that kind of thing. And so we need to do more with that directory around diversifying it, but we're upkeeping that directory, and then NUM pays for mental health packages. Like the first 3 sessions for sex workers are paid for by NUM, so we can support sex workers in accessing. And then we also do digital drop-ins and things so that sex workers are exposed to different forms or different types of therapy, and then they can choose which one might work best for them. We have a racial justice project that also started during the pandemic, because when I came to NUM, I was the only person of color, and it's like, oh, that whole thing about my charity so right in the UK, it was so real at NUM. And so we wanted to look into what is the impact of COVID among racialized sex workers. So we ran a survey during the pandemic, and then a follow-up study that Elizabeth is leading. So you might have seen her as part of the BIPOC Academy. She was here before. And so that project, some of what sex workers of color were reporting was victimization by those in public trust. So we're developing a reporting form for people to document that harm against police, or from police, from health professionals as part of Inclusion Health, from charities, from others, landlords as well, that violate them in some form. And then there's a whole complaints process that we worked with a member of the union actually to identify the different formal complaints processes. But we want NUM to be in a position to offer third-party reports or collective reports about experiences of harm. We have a place for that information to land in terms of the police forces, but we need to explore through Inclusion Health how we can make a third-party complaint on behalf of sex workers, because you know, racialized sex workers, migrant sex workers, they experience crimmigration, so it's not like they're going to be able to make an individual report, but we want to demystify that pathway for sex workers who want to file complaints. Other parts of that will be advocacy documents around different policies in health and in policing, and how it impacts the lives of racialized sex workers. So we're going to have some advocacy tools there. And one of the major things they asked for is like safe spaces. So we have to find a way to create safe spaces for racialized sex workers and for migrant sex workers, but lots to do. Recently, we started this vocational support services, because I truly believe that exit services or career exploration has to sit within sex worker organizations, and those that understand sex work as work, and those that, you know, have people on team that have been in and out of sex work or blended it with mainstream jobs. So that IP is sex worker IP, and so we've just launched a series of workshops to support sex workers in identifying skills, transferable skills, and also we're doing this competency dictionary where they can translate their transferable skills into mainstream jobs. Like, so, you know, sex workers do all kinds of things. There's like complaints department, the sales department, all of that. And so those skills, all of those skills are transferable for those who want to work in mainstream work. And so there's that. There's a whole bunch of other things around that. We're just launching that, but that was based on some research that we did recently. And then the last thing, and I think I did mention, but all of our programs are designed by sex workers and evaluated by sex workers, and usually come about because of research done by and for and with sex workers. So they absolutely design the services that meet their needs the best and the most. I don't think I have to go through all these forms of violence. I think people have talked about that, talked about intersectional violence and how, in addition to sex work, people are surviving these forms of violence every day and in every moment. And we have to be mindful of that and the stress of this. And yeah, it's just, yeah, it's something that we just have to be mindful of. We have people who are racialized and disabled. We have people who have diagnosed and undiagnosed psychological, what are they calling it? Psychosocial mental health issues, and also co-concurrent issues as well. So we have to be mindful of all of those things. So this slide is very dense in terms of text because I was just like, I think I went to ChatGPT or something to just kind of, but I was looking at like all of the forms of punishment, like the medieval punishment around the flogging and the public humiliation, and the church was all involved in harming sex workers. And then we have all of these various acts, right? Contagious Disease Act, Criminal Law Amendment Acts, you know, Street Offenses Act, all these, it's forms of state violence that have been pervasive throughout modern history. And it's all based in this carceral logics, right? So the policies and practices are about punitive control. It's about restriction, surveillance, and punishment. So everything that's offered by the state at this point is either monitoring and controlling a population or imprisoning them with visible and invisible bars. So that's sort of the context that sex workers have been surviving for generations. If you transgress, you're silenced in some way, right? So this is, I should have probably said a trigger warning, but just sharing some reports of violence that we received in just the past year. And some of the most, we received 519 reports of harm with 794 accounts of harm within those reports. And so this is like a small fraction of sex workers who report to NUM. This is the data that we have. So the top forms of violence that we see is malicious communication, stalking and harassment on and offline, physical assault, refusal to pay, boundary pushing, a dangerous person, so a sex worker encounters a dangerous person, rape and assault, and of course stealthing, which someone else spoke about today. So given all those harms, we wrote this. We noticed that sex workers were not willing to engage with police, obviously, for obvious reasons, all the obvious reasons, but we did a survey did a journal article related to this, but it's for all the reasons that everyone said already, right? It's, you know, fear of being outed, fear of criminalization, not trusting the police, apathy, you know, it's not going to do anything if they do. And people who are moms, people who are students, migrants, you know, people who are working other jobs, all these individuals, they have so much at stake. So, you know, they have to decide, are they going to give it all up and you know, be exposed and known by the state and report somebody who victimized them? Or are they just going to kind of suck it up and absorb and move on? And we all know that there are certain predators that target certain kinds of people because they don't make good witnesses. They don't make good victims, right? And sex workers as a whole are not ideal victims. So these are some of the reasons why sex workers said that they don't report and they won't. And they want to protect family too. They want to, if you've been harmed in a venue and you report to police, guess what? That venue's on the radar and the police can come and do a raid a week later at that venue. So sex workers are really protective of other sex workers in that way. So they would rather share the information with other people in the industry and not report even anonymously with police. So some of the stats that we had with anonymous reporting that I didn't include here, but in 2012 when NUM started, the willingness to provide anonymous reports to police, I believe, was 95%. and that dropped to 75% in 2020, and then went down to something like 50%. So only half of the reports that we receive even get to the National Crime Agency as far as pursuing pursuing perpetrators. And about 8% of sex workers were willing to engage police in their criminal justice seeking activities in 2021, and now I think it's about 14%. But that's lack of trust in police, and that adversarial relationship that police have with sex workers is generational, and so of course it's a barrier to reporting. We didn't write a paper on why disclose, but I think we all could, right? And some of the things that people talked about as well, because, disclosure to health professionals, you don't know who you're telling, you don't know what they're gonna do with that information. There's no firewall between police and immigration right now, so we see deportations, and who knows if there's a firewall between health services and social services or housing services. So there's all of this that people have to consider in addition to that relational or interpersonal stigma that you get if you disclose. You don't know what reaction you're going to get from people. So they talk about all of these fears of what happens to their records. As you know, or some of you know, that people who are known sex workers to the state try and travel to places like the US and they can't get in, right? If you have an OnlyFans account, you can't get into the US. Sorry, but you can't. They'll lock you out at the border, even if you're going to visit family, or even if you're going on vacation to take a break. They won't allow you in. So there are so many things that, disclosure is or non-disclosure is self-preservation, right? And some of these harms other people have talked about, framing sex work as vectors of disease, these invasive questions, somebody mentioned that yesterday, blaming sex workers for the health issues that they survive. There's this whole paternalism, I put the white, it wasn't in the research, but saviorism, denial of support services. That is like one of the critically cruel things that happens, is that sex workers are denied the service when they approach and ask for services, and that's ridiculous. So some of what NUM does in terms of the mental health supports is providing those resources, like I said, the mental health services and therapy sessions. And our therapist is a hypnotherapist, so watch your wallet. But he has some videos on YouTube about meditation, dealing with change, dealing with anxiety, so people can just play those videos and take a 5-minute break if they need to. We talked about the directory, talked about the packages. We also offer emergency resources. We have a little bit of an emergency fund that we're kind of quiet about because we have to find resources for it all the time, but emergency food and resources to folks. And then we have a partnership with I can't think their new name, ILO. They were MindGeek, and so they have managed most of the adult platforms, including Pornhub and those. And so we are part of their trusted flagger system. So we are able to, when sex workers contact to get content removed, we can get that removed pretty immediately. The last case we did, we got it removed within 2 hours. So it's pretty fast for that. But it's only the sites that they manage that we're able to do that. Okay, so now I'll just quickly go through some of the findings of the various research projects. And I know that Paul mentioned that we need to have a conversation between sex workers and practitioners and researchers, but definitely at NUM, we position ourselves where we only engage with research with certain kinds of researchers that are, engaging in participatory studies, that are not doing that just in name, but it has to be in deed, that sex workers are truly participating and have some control and ownership over the research. And also, a part of our sex worker-led research projects was about us controlling the agenda, right? And making sure that sex workers get opportunities to do research with us in areas that we are lacking in knowledge. How much time do I have? Nobody knows. Okay, don't say. Okay, so we did 2 surveys during the pandemic because we wanted to do a national response, and we wanted to have that informed by what sex workers needed. And as other people have discussed, and probably more eloquently than I, about the mental health issues and the struggle that sex workers were going through during the pandemic. And so it was about rallying in the community. And, you know, as you know, SWORN did a hardship fund. And then right after the hardship fund was depleted, then we came in with our emergency vouchers and tried to sustain that voucher program throughout. But people were talking about just having severe declines in their mental health due to lockdowns and financial hardships. And also, they had to violate health ordinances in order to go to work because all of the platforms shut down their booking capabilities because at the request of the state and not in consultation with sex workers. So they were, they had to go out to the streets at times to find folks. And as you know, there's a lack of support because sex work wasn't identified as work and sex workers were not recognized as workers, so they got very little support from the state. As part of our racial justice project, the mental health and disability features quite a bit. We're going to be going live with some of this data in the new year, but it is a real issue with sex workers, with racialized sex workers, just being able to survive their day-to-day, but also having to deal with discrimination and systemic discrimination built into the NHS. And, you know, just to try and get the health and the services that they need. So sex workers had some quotes around that, around police are sent to deal with health problems. They're not trained and people die, right? And we know that, we see that all over the world. I'll move on. The Handsome Pay Project was a project that Jason Domino led at NUM a couple of years ago, and it was about masculine sex workers or mass sex workers and some of the issues that they were facing in terms of violence. And this population is completely, almost completely invisibilized among sex work organizing, and particularly in the practitioner sector. I don't think there is a buy-in for, there might be buy-in for groups of mask workers, but not necessarily an organization that that supports their needs holistically. So this was just some of the things that male sex workers said. And if Jordan's in the room, Jordan is going to be leading a project in our Scotland-based organization to do masks to work. I didn't tell you about an Umbrella Lane. Anyway, we took over Umbrella Lane took over Umbrella Lane in 2021. Helped it close and then reopened an Umbrella Lane in its place, but it's a well-being space for Scotland-based sex workers. We have 2 migrant, racialized folks that speak Spanish, Brazilian Portuguese, and Urdu, so we're seeing a lot of migrants, because if you want migrants, hire migrants, right? But out of that project, Jordan is going to be exploring and working with some masked sex workers to see how we could extend services to them and extend resources to them so you can drop in, they can go on outings and stuff like that. Last year, they took sex workers to the opera and, you know, just get out in the community and do stuff, so that's fun. And then we did a visual violence project. So this was with Dr. Scarlett Redman and Camille Waring. Many of you may know Camille. She's pretty infamous, I guess you could say, around image-based violence. So we did this project because we were seeing so many reports of online harms, and this project inspired us to join the Trusted Flagger program to get people's content removed. But people were talking about, somebody else earlier was talking about outing, was talking about doxing, was talking about, like, it's essentially terrorism that happens to them online. So much theft of content. And then the mental health impacts, there's long-term mental health impacts for folks that have been outed in certain ways and that have no control over how people use their content online, and you can just never be forgotten, right? And so, like, it just causes a lot of issues for people. So that's one of the things that we did was the content removal, but there's much, much more that we all have to do around that issue. Then we did a project on banking discrimination because sex workers were coming to us saying not only are their accounts being closed because of various algorithms and micropayments going into their accounts that flag, but also they were being denied access to open bank accounts. And so this was based on some of the SWORN research and some of the research done with the union. And so Tess Herman, who was with the union, led this study with us. And so what we did afterwards is I met with UK banking and, UK finance and the other one. I can't remember the other one now. I probably wrote it down. UK Finance and the Financial Conduct Authority. Gave them case studies, explained to them that this is what's happening. The banks are so risk averse, they're thinking that, you know, sex workers are being trafficked. It's like the sex workers are coming to you to open a business account are not the people that you need to worry about. But some of the banks, like NatWest, have explicitly named sex work and I believe it was money laundering and some other organized crime, all in the same sentence, right? And so they're worried about getting sued themselves, so then they're extremely risk averse when it comes to giving sex workers bank accounts. So it's still an ongoing fight, and I'm sure many folks here are working on the debanking, but it's that denial of financial citizenship. So I'm like, would you ever turn away a domestic abuse survivor? Would you ever close their account? So why close a sex worker's account? And then as part of our vocational support services, financial literacy, savings and investment, all of that is part of leaving sex work, because you're not gonna be able to go on benefits and leave sex work, right? Like so it just felt like, yeah, it's I don't know, I have no words that I can say while we're live streaming, but catch me in the bar and I'll tell you how I truly think about that. So in Umbrella Lane, we did a survey and needs assessment before, like right when we took it over, and there was like just incredible accounts of mental health, isolation, especially for online workers and off-street workers, and then neurodivergence appears across a lot of our studies as well, and so people just need a sense of community. So I'm hoping that that's what Umbrella Lane does, and then we'll look at how we can do all kinds of testing there. There's a clothing exchange and ethnically, culturally appropriate foods and hampers and stuff like that. There's things there, and then we're doing pop-up drop-ins across Scotland, so we're not just in Glasgow, but there's just so much around creating a sense of community and well-being and improving well-being among sex workers just by getting together and watching a movie or doing something in a safe space. The Leaving the Game project. So this is our recent research project. We're just finishing it now, and as I said, it informs the vocational support services. And people were talking about barriers to leaving sex industries, but also like health and disability was a reason to be in sex industries. But so it was just like managing health and sex work. You can do that much easier at times than you can with managing health and mainstream jobs. So this project we'll be sharing a lot of the report about this project, and then this way we're able to really fine tune and deliver some of the services around that, because we want to do career speed dating, you know, and fun things like that for sex workers to engage with, and then figure out, do you want to leave sex work now? Do you want to in 6 months? So we have this budgeting calculator and things that people can use to make planned transitions, or if they want to blend sex work with mainstream jobs, which are the jobs that are best to blend sex work with, and those kinds of things. So yeah, we'll be sharing more about that project. I am almost done. Find and Treat, Inclusion Health project that we just finished. Maybe some of you were involved in that, or maybe some of you know about that, but we've been part of this Inclusion Health network for some time, and we created a toolkit with some other groups, but this is just really about access issues with health, and but we will be sharing that report as well, but yeah, I'll kind of keep that kind of, stop talking. Okay, so, but what everybody wants is sex workers are inadequately served, right? So they're denied resources, and then when they cope with that denial through alcohol, self-harm, drugs, self-medication, whatever it is, then they're responsibilized for how they've coped with that harm. And so it's kind of like they're harmed more than once. They're harmed like 3 times. So for us, the denial of support to sex workers is psychological warfare, and it needs to fucking end. 2 announcements. This year is the 20th anniversary of International Day to End Violence Against Sex Workers. That's why some of us have these gold pins, but I'll bring more. I didn't bring enough. To our count, the people that we can publicly name, there's 198 sex workers in the UK that have been murdered since 1990. We're going to be adding about 40 more individuals next year, because we're including those who were taken from us through domestic abuse situations. And so we are having an event at Crossbones Theatre this year. So come in spirit, because we tweet the names, and it takes us probably 16 hours or something to tweet the names. This is the familiar, this is how I knew that it was, oh, sorry. This is how I knew that it was a, oh, it should be playing. It's not playing. No, it's not playing. Oh well. I have a video there. I didn't play. Anyway, this is, Under the Red Umbrella is zine that we do with other sex worker organizations. Oh, I'm so sad that it's not playing. That's too bad. Okay, do I have a second to make it play? I have all the seconds? Okay, I don't have time. Okay, well, anyway, the zine's on our website, but it is a sex worker-led magazine that shares stories and information and poetry and art from sex worker-led groups across the UK and in Northern Ireland. And they're cutting me. Oh, you're supposed to play the theme song. What? What? Oh, yeah. I don't know why it doesn't work. It should just play. Yeah. Press play. Oh, that's it. Oh, yay! Okay. So contributions from all of these groups, and this is our second edition. So we want to do more. And Spicy Coffee, upcoming events, donate to all the groups, and contact information. Brilliant, yay, it works, technology. Yeah, thank you, Alex, thank you.
Thank you. Oh, that's all right, thanks. Thank you so much to all our panelists. And surprise, surprise, we are running out of time for questions. I don't know how this keeps happening, but we now have a coffee break in the coffee room. Come back in half an hour, and then we'll actually only have an hour left before the reception. So what we thought is to only have one of the two closing workshops and to kind of have a wrap-up session discussing potential joint research idea, collaboration, but we'll tell you more about this in half an hour. Did you want to say something?
What I forgot, there's a handout about family affair at the table. There's a few copies left, so feel free to take one. And there's also a contact, and you're free to contact me. Thank you.
Bon café. Ça va? Hein?